policy analyst at the Europe in the World program here at the European Policy Center. And today I'm delighted to be joined by the stellar panel for the launch event of the third edition of the Outlook paper. And let me briefly introduce them to you. Ricardo Borges de Castro, head of the Europe in the World program and associate director at the EPC. He's also the editor of the Outlook paper. Amanda Paul, deputy head and senior policy analyst at the European Policy Center. Svetlana Taran, EPC and the King Baudouin Foundation research fellow here at EPC. Ivano Di Carlo, senior policy analyst here at the EPC. Mihai Kihaya, policy analyst at the EPC, Raul Villegas, program assistant at the Europe in the World program, Berta Lopez Domenech, junior policy analyst at the European Politics and Institutions program here at the EPC, and last but not least, Giulia Torchio, junior policy analyst at the Europe's Political Economy program. So welcome and thank you for joining us today. This Outlook paper is a navigation guide for 2024. It focuses on the most important global actors and regions, as well as flashpoints and emerging policy challenges for the EU. The paper begins by looking back at the 2023 Outlook paper, what we anticipated, what went towards the direction of our anticipation, and what went not towards it. Then we actually anticipate the events for 2024. We will actually follow the structure of the paper during today's presentation. So first we will have Ricardo present the paper, and then we will have a conversation about Russia's war of aggression and Ukraine with Amanda and Svetlana. We will take the questions from the audience right after. Then we will move farther down to the Indo-Pacific and Latin America and China and discuss the key regions that are expected to be very important for the EU in 2024. We will take another session of the Q&A afterwards. And then lastly, we will move to the policies and emerging challenges. We will discuss artificial intelligence, enlargement policy, as well as security and defense in 2024, and we will take another Q&A session. Lastly, I will ask our policy analysts to briefly summarize their recommendations to the EU for 2024, and if we have time, we will take more questions from the audience. So without further ado, Ricardo, please let us know about 2024 Outlook.
Right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Jana, for introducing us all. And I think my first word is certainly to thank you for coming here today to the launch of the third edition of the Outlook paper. But I think more than that is really to thank all the authors. There's just a few of them here today. I mean, and we're already a lot. I think we need to change the titles of our programs because it go on and on and on and on and on. So I think we might need to do that so that these introductions are a little bit quicker. But so we have a few of the authors here with us today, but many more people contributed to this paper. This is basically an enterprise that takes us 6 to 7 months to do. It is a complete sort of a cross-program work, which is, we believe, it's really one of the added values and one of the assets of the European Policy Center is precisely the ability to think across policy areas and bring different analysts, also from different stages of their careers and analyst life. So this is really to thank you all for all I know the hard work that you put into the paper. As Jana just said, so the paper follows normally every year the same structure, and this year we wanted really to wrap our minds around the let's say this really electoral year on steroids that we're going to see across the world, but also here in Europe, and what might be the consequences of some of those electoral processes to geopolitics, but also to the EU, how the EU sort of engages in the world. So. The paper, as we said, we look again to, let's say, to the notion of permacrisis. And then we go through different phases with, as Jana was saying, the look back. I mean, the look back exercise is something that most foresighters and forecasters recommend you to do, because it's really a way for you to check your assumptions and the way that you thought about the problems. So this is something that we like to do. And so we will discuss a little bit those as well. And then, I mean, as you can see, you have the paper with you. So there's also the QR codes. I think in some of the I think in some of the graphs, it will actually be easier for you to look at them in the let's say in a computer, because you can actually enlarge them. So anyway, but moving on, I wanted first to stop here on the permacrisis that we've been charting since the first edition of the Outlook paper. As you know, the EPC coined the term permacrisis at the first anniversary of the COVID pandemic. So this was an article written by Fabian Zulik, by Yanis Manolidis, and myself. And I think since on, we have really seen that the world has been under immense pressure. And I think what we wanted to convey, and I probably here I'll just focus a little bit more on the let's say some of the innovations, was really this time a lot of the feedback that we used to have from readers and participants in these discussions were, where's the climate crisis? And so this year we decided to add also anomalies in variation of global temperature, and particularly on the decade that we're looking on the permacrisis. And basically, I mean, what this tells us is that, I mean, in the 10 warmest years of the last decade were, I mean, on record were during the last decade. So really, the climate crisis is here with us. And I think this is something that we also need to wrap our minds around it. Of course, on the red line, you see really what are the effects of so many of these crises to the economy, and again, what are some of the impacts that this has on policymaking. I mean, strictly, the Outlook paper is not a foresight paper. We look ahead, we look for the year ahead, but it's not this long term. Okay, we have some areas or some elements in the paper that allow us to think a little bit beyond the year ahead. And we deliberately do that, for example, in the conclusion. The conclusion normally looks at the year that will follow. And so, but again, this is very much what we expect that might develop during the next 11 months regarding the way that Europe engages with the world. In terms of key messages, I believe of the paper that I believe that we wanted to leave, I think in the first one, and we will discuss it a little bit, is the question, is the EU really doing enough to support Ukraine? This is a question that we have. The answer that we give almost implicitly is that it's no. There's much more that we can do. And really, when we put this together, this visual, this shows you the amount of support that we have provided Ukraine since the war, the full-scale invasion of Ukraine started. And these are also commitments. So this is not money that has been disbursed. And on the gray side, you have actually money spent on Russian fossil fuels. And you can see the disparity, or I mean, you could say, okay, I mean, it's very substantial. But the point here, the question is, are we actually Europeans taking this problem seriously? Are we actually seeing this as a strategic change, game changer? I mean, we remember that when the war started, and we are about to not commemorate, but mark the second anniversary of the war. And I think what for us is important in this graph is to show, although a lot has been done, much more can be done. And we, of course, you can also always shoot back at me, okay, but you can't undo all these, the pipelines and the contracts that are there in terms of energy dependency that were there. That's not the point that we're trying to make. The point we're trying to make is that we can do much better than this. So, and I think we'll have a chance to speak more about this problem. But for me, this basically highlights that, as far as I'm concerned, in terms of the long term, the EU and its member states are not taking Ukraine as serious as they should be taking, at least in our view. I think the second key message that we wanted to also to get our minds around was really this: are we learning the language of power, but unlearning the language of influence? How actually, what are the consequences of becoming a geopolitical actor? Does this have an implication in the way that the EU is able to influence processes. Okay, you can always also say your basic assumption is that the EU has had influence before. So this is also a question that we might ask. But still, and I believe that the way that the EU initially, for example, handled Hamas's terrorist attack on Israel and what followed from that, you could make an argument that although some have said that the EU was acting geopolitically, I don't think that we were not being able, and we have not been able to influence the process so far. And I think that has also shown, to a certain extent, some of the limitations of this geopolitical actor that is really, I mean, the EU has been on a crash course in geopolitics, and it's really not an easy one. So I think that is really the one of the points that we wanted to make, is to think about this potential paradox between power and influence. Then moving forward, I think the other idea that we want really to play with or discuss with everybody is this idea of securitization of policy areas across the EU. So this is just a visual that is in the paper with very little text, just for people to think about it and say, okay, these guys are completely wrong about this, or maybe actually they're onto something. The idea being that after a period, let's say, of weaponization of almost everything, the system, the policy response to this has been to secure, to protect, to defend. And so you see this across many policy areas. To a certain extent, this is a normal process. I believe that the question that we need to ask ourselves, are we cognizant of what might be then the consequences for the EU in the global stage if by any chance we become more defensive, more protective, and less or more inward looking? I mean, is this happening or not? And so that's sort of a reflection that we wanted to do. So yeah, I think this ends here. Let's go back. I wanted so these were some sort of just some of the points that I wanted to make initially. I think we're going to look back a little bit and then I don't know, but you take it over.
Yeah, thank you, Ricardo, for introducing us to the Outlook paper 2024. So flashpoints, what ifs to avoid if only, the regions, the emerging policy challenges that the EU should expect in 2024. This is all that we can find in the Outlook paper. But could you please tell us a bit of what kind of went towards the direction of what we anticipated last year?
Sure. I mean, I think the points, I mean, the areas that we chose to on the look back section, first of all, was really this notion of learning the language of power, because that was the theme of last year's paper, was Europe in the World in 2023, learning the language of power. So we look back a little bit and we sort of reflect very briefly on this, the potential paradox of power and influence. I think the second was really the resilience or the ability that the Russians have been able to maintain their economy. And I think this was in the 2023 edition, although we were very careful in the way that we said that how the Russian economy would have evolved, we were expecting that would have evolved more negatively than in the end did. So I think it is also important for us to reflect. I think Svetlana will be able then also to explain why this has happened, but from trade reorientation, from sanction circumvention, from the price, the problems that there were there in the oil cap. There's several factors that explain why the Russian economy has done better than we had anticipated. So I think that's one. It's very important for us also. I mean, economic forecasting is really one of the most risky things because it's just very, I mean, it can change very rapidly. So I think that was one point. I think the other point was really the terrorist attack, the Hamas terrorist attack, which to a certain extent we consider it as a black swan, something that we were just, basically no one was really prepared for that. I think there was certainly some lack of foresight even in that regard. And normally I think the point that we wanted to make was not so much the terrorist attack in itself, but it was really the idea of strategic surprises. Our strategic surprise can completely change things, and then it evolves in a way that it's very unpredictable. I think where we were where we did not very well, but where I think that we did well was this paper was, I think it was, and the EPC has been one of the first to put this notion of economic security in the policy discussions in Brussels. And so the entry that we had in the paper, I think we're very much on the mark, because a lot of the things that followed in 2023 really sort of confirmed that. So just for the look back, I'll stay here.
Thank you, Ricardo. And let's move forward and bring into the discussion Amanda and Svetlana. As the paper is named From Voting to Geopolitics.
Maybe I turn it off and yours turn it off as well. Go ahead.
Thank you. So what would be your take on,
It's on.
Yeah. So what would be your stance on what happens if Trump is re-elected? What happens in Ukraine in case that happens? What happens to the transatlantic strategy towards Russia if that happens? And here maybe I can extend the question to Amanda and Svetlana.
I mean, I'll be very brief. I mean, I think that is another, the elements, let's say we, in the paper, there's two elements that we find that are going to be key for this year. First is really how we respond to Russia's aggression on Ukraine, and so the support that we can give Ukraine. And the second one is the US elections. But with the reflection that, you know, irrespective of who's going to be in the White House, the EU should be taking decisions now for example, on security and defense that should not depend on who wins the elections. We believe, and there's a table that puts both potential presidencies face to face in the paper, what the Biden presidency might look like, what Trump presidency might look like on several key issues. On the ones that you asked, I think, okay, it's not to say that Mr. Biden is not having a lot of problems in trying, for example, to approve a support for Ukraine that is stuck in Congress, but it's very clear that, it's very possible that if Mr. Trump wins the elections, I mean, there'll be a huge push on Ukraine to let's say, to make peace with Russia. There's probably, he made the president, Mr. Trump made the comments recently about NATO. So I think this questions the whole, let's say, European security architecture, I think profoundly. I think with Russia, you know, it's very ambivalent, it's very unpredictable in a way that I think that he might deal with the Russians. So yeah, these are some of the uncertainties that will come from that. Yeah.
Thank you. And you're also suggesting the network of transatlantic guardrails, so we can maybe come back to this. But before then, Svetlana, could you please tell us about Ukraine? What should we expect in 2024?
Thank you, Yana. Do you hear me? Yeah, thank you. So what will happen in Ukraine, I think, to the large extent on of international community supporting Ukraine. Will it stay the same incremental and very cautious and slow approach, or it will be changed in terms of speed and in terms of scope and in terms of providing Ukraine with air superiority and so on. And for now, I can see also from my perspective as a Ukrainian, and I can confirm what just Ricardo said, that I do not see this readiness to change this approach radically, to really provide Ukraine with what it needs to win this war, as we were asking for 2 years. And I think also that the reason for this unreadiness to change this approach is that the West, the EU countries, even the societies maybe, do not consider this war as a serious threat for their countries. I still do not consider. And I think when this will change, then the approach will be changed as well, and the real relevant support will be provided. And taking into account all these uncertainties that was also mentioned, I can say that Ukraine will face a year of existential threat. and a year of very huge uncertainty and pressure in this year. And of course, and what is even worse, that the next year is even less certain. So it's like with totally unknown what we will be doing in 2025. And I can say that what is more certain, that this war will continue. This war of attrition and aggression will continue, because Putin is certain that he can, he's very certain, especially now, he's very confident that he can win this war. And he will double down his aggression. And we can see this on the front line now, that they are doing their offensive, yes? And we can see the situation near the Avdiivka. And for Ukraine, it's a very hard situation, and of course Ukraine will seek to secure international help, international assistance by these long-term security agreements that we already have 3 of them, yes, but more to come. And also and I also want to reflect on that. You mentioned that there will be more pressure for peace negotiations for Ukraine. And I can confirm as a Ukrainian that Ukrainians are very emotionally exhausted already with this 2-year war. And nobody wants peace more than Ukrainians. And of course, Ukrainians would like to peace become today. No, I mean, that peace comes today to Ukraine, and we will continue our living as before, but let me ask you, what will be the price? What Putin will ask, especially from this position, from positions that they are doing offensive, that they are in a stronger position now. So from the strong position, what we will need to concede, what will be the price for Ukrainians? And if you can provide this answer, Ukrainians will be very grateful. And just brief points, milestones of other important issues, very brief. It's so about Ukrainian economy. Ukrainian economy actually, with if support, international financial support is provided, is expected to gradually recover, as it was last year for 5%. And but again, financial support is a major condition for this. And any disruptions of financial support to Ukraine from EU or US, as we already happened this at the beginning of the year, yes, with the EU. When EU could not approve this Ukraine facility, and there was just disruptions, and it put a lot of pressure on our macroeconomic stability. So this, and also Ukraine, what Ukraine will be trying to do is, of course, increase its own capacities, military and economic capacities, to gradually reduce its dependence on international support, but it will take time. Thank you.
Thank you, Svetlana, for sharing your expertise, and also for sharing the emotions that Ukrainians feel right now. Amanda, hearing all this, could you briefly tell us the situation on the battlefield, and what kind of security guarantees does the EU provide, or could provide, looking at the battlefield situation? So perspective of the battlefield from the EU side.
You made my life easier, because you covered so many points. I also want to reiterate that European security depends on Ukrainian security. And this is obviously not clear still to many people in Europe. I get that in the United States it might be a bit unclear, but I find this mind-boggling that Europeans, particularly European officials, still don't really understand this. Not everybody, of course, you know, the neighbors, the Baltic states and whatnot, they do. But there's still too many politicians and officials that do not make this link effectively. And this is really bad. I mean, 2024 is going to be a really, really decisive year for Ukraine, first and foremost, but also for the Western allies, because it's a really now or never moment this year. I mean, Ukraine's situation, I can't stress how difficult it is. The situation on the Eastern Front is dismal. Ukrainians are really struggling to hold the line. I mean, this is the question that you asked, and this is the answer. And honestly, it makes me almost want to cry because it was totally unavoidable. In 2023, the EU did very little, in my opinion, to support Ukraine in terms of military assistance. They failed Ukraine. I mean, the United States could also have done more. But when you look at what was delivered from them and from us, you know, there's a big gap. This is really embarrassing as a European to say that, given the fact, as I mentioned in the beginning, this is about European security. Much more could have been done in 2023. The fact that it wasn't means that Ukraine will have to go through this year now, as Svetlana pointed out, in a very, very difficult situation on the battlefield, particularly on the Eastern Front. They won't be able to make any progress until 2025. But again, this is very dependent on what is delivered. One can only hope and pray that the US package gets through, because if it doesn't, the situation that Ukraine finds itself in now is going to be, you know, sort of multiplied by 1 million times. I mean, I believe that package will get through, hopefully in the next few weeks, but there is still a small chance that it won't. And of course, this is a gift for the Russians because they're able to take advantage of this situation. When it comes to the EU, I mean, they're running behind. I mean, the production of weapons is not happening. I mean, everything needs to be speeded up. I mean, last year, as we all know, the EU was supposed to deliver 1 million shells to Ukraine. That never happened. I think they received about 400,000 in the end, which is why the guys on the battlefield today are having to ration the shells that they use. It's something like a 10-to-1 ratio. For every one that Ukraine has, Russia uses a 10. This is a huge gap. The same for the air defense systems. Ukraine is having to limit how it uses its air defense systems. This is a tragedy. And as we see, Russia is taking advantage of this by targeting key infrastructure, particularly civilian infrastructure, because killing civilians is a core part of Russia's war strategy. So I can only hope, because I have no definitive evidence yet to prove it, that the EU is going to step up what it does this year and does it very quickly, so that in 2025, Ukraine will find itself in a much stronger position. On the point that you made, Jana, yes, we are now finally starting to see some steps bilaterally, thanks to the UK, actually. I mean, they were the first ones to put together the security assurances for Ukraine. I mean, these assurances stem from the NATO summit in Vilnius, when the G7 committed to signing individual bilateral agreements with Ukraine. These agreements, though, aren't legally binding, but still it's better than nothing, and they provide, let's say, long-term support for Ukraine in military, financial, humanitarian, in some cases for several years. I mean, I haven't had a chance to study in detail the German or the French ones, but I think they're going in the right direction. And as far as I know, Canada and some other countries will also be signing these agreements very soon. So this is positive, but I mean, to be honest, it's also like a drop in the ocean, if I can put it that way. And my last point is this. What I think is really frustrating is that the collective West actually has more than enough economic, industrial, and military resources to surpass what Russia has. This is a fact. This is a fact. But unfortunately, for whatever reason, they still hesitate. Is it because of the nuclear threat? Who knows? I mean, the Chinese have made it a very deep and red line that the Russians shouldn't use nuclear arms. I mean, we met with the Chinese again last week, and they reiterate this point: nuclear, nuclear, nuclear. We're doing what we can. So they really need to start to be courageous and brave, and not worry about the Americans. You know, worry about what we're doing. What's going to happen in the United States is going to happen. That's not an excuse for sitting and only doing 50% of the work. 50% or less is what we've seen so far. Okay, sorry for being so long. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Amanda. This is quite comprehensive, and coupled with the elections towards the end, I think situation will become even more difficult to deal. But in the interest of time, I think it's time to move to the audience. So if you have any questions regarding what we discussed so far, please raise your hand.
Thank you very much for that. It was really, really insightful. Would you be able to make a comment on possible scenarios for 2024 with regard to security guarantees for Ukraine based on election outcomes in the UK, the US, all over Europe? Thank you.
Yeah, I will collect the questions and maybe we can answer at the end.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Burçak İnal. I'm from the European Banking Federation. Actually, just this morning, I'm coming from another event where people from the Council, Commission, EES, and also the Ukrainian permrep were talking about the reconstruction of Ukraine. So I just wanted to know your views on whether this whole discussion about the reconstruction of Ukraine is the right approach. I mean, of course, in this event, it was talked about that what we do to help the war is much more important than the preparations for the reconstruction. But I just want to have your views on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentations. It is a fact, like you said, that the EU is not doing even half of what it should be doing. But do you see a change, a positive change in that this year? Is there a sign that it will happen, or are we in just letting it go?
Yeah, thanks again for the presentation. It was hugely interesting for me. In a similar sort of vein to my colleague from the EBF, I was at an event this morning, and there was an E word that they mentioned, which I didn't hear in either of the interventions, which was enlargement. And I'm interested on your views on that, because I'm hearing quite a lot of that talk at the moment. I mean, the event was on single market, right? And enlargement came up. So yeah, a penny for your thoughts on that.
Thank you. So we will have we will talk about enlargement towards the end of our discussion, but maybe you can say a few words about this and the rest of the questions.
I mean, on the issue of will the EU change? Yeah, I mean, I see some, positive signs, but I mean, it changes like a snail, right? Things move far too slowly. And in parallel, we have this sense of, self-congratulation. Whenever there's like a small change, everybody's patting each other on the back and saying, look, wow, look what we've done. I mean, this isn't good enough. I mean, for example, the fact that the 50 billion package got through, it's great. But if you look at that as a percent of EU GDP as a whole, I mean, it's a drop in the ocean. I mean, much more money should be put on the table, and it shouldn't take so long to put this money on the table. And Ukraine doesn't have time. Time's not on Ukraine's side. It's on Russia's side, at least for the moment. I mean, the Russians are also not in the ideal scenario, but they have time, and Putin has a strategic goal. I don't know what the EU's real strategic goal is, quite honestly. On the security guarantees, I mean, they're not security guarantees, right? The security assurances, which is something very different. But I mean, these sort of agreements are going to be really crucial for Ukraine because it gives them clarity when it comes to an end of hostilities. I'm not going to say a ceasefire, but sort of some sort of end of a cessation of hostilities, when they would have to go and talk with the Russians, because Ukraine is not going to talk with the Russians unless it has many more of these sorts of security assurances signed. It needs to know 110% that the West is really in Ukraine's camp. Words are not enough. You can go to, if you go to the table and speak to the Russians, but you have nothing behind you, that leaves Ukraine in a very fragile situation. If they would have a whole set of different security assurances already, that will make them more comfortable when it gets to the point of talking to the Russians. I mean, we're not obviously at that point yet, because Ukraine needs to go into this conversation from a position of strength. I mean, I think there's a recognition in Ukraine that they probably won't be able to return all of their territories. But for them, the more important thing is that when they do reach an agreement, it's an agreement that cannot be rebroached again in the future, that it's going to be sustainable, it's going to be effective. And this is why these security assurances are really, really important from the Europeans, but also from other countries. There's no reason why, you know, Canada, who will hopefully have their assurances soon, Japan, and potentially the United States. So the two things are sort of combined, but at the moment they're not security guarantees, because this is only NATO Article 5, right? That's what Ukraine really wants and really needs. But alternatives have to be looked at in the meantime, although one can hope that eventually Ukraine will get into NATO. And I'll leave the other two questions to you.
Okay, so on reconstruction, first of all, this adoption of Ukraine facility is a great step for reconstruction, because some funds within this facility will be directed to recovery projects. Yes, and as far as I know, Ukrainian government is working with the European Commission on Ukraine plan, which will contain like a detailed investment agenda for these recovery projects that will be covered by Ukraine facilities. So it's a great, and also this Ukraine facility provides 8 billion euro for investment support, for private investment support framework, which will cover war-related insurance risk. But if we see at the numbers, this Ukraine facility is 50 billion, and it will contain all kind of aid support for Ukraine: macroeconomic support, budget support, recovery support, investment support, technical support. So I mean, it's for 4 years. So and for this year, for even 2024, Ukraine needs to cover budget deficits 37 billion. And only half of 37 are now secured. And Ukraine will rely on this money from Ukraine facility to secure its budget deficit, its essential social expenditures. And if we do this calculation, it means that for the recovery, some funds will be left. I mean, not so much funds will be left for real recovery projects. So I think EU and Ukraine will rely on private investment as a also very important source for reconstruction. But again, it's private investment would very much depend on the security situation in Ukraine, because as for now, even with some insurance instruments, private investors are not that very keen to invest into Ukraine. So so again, it's a complex issue with the security situation, with also support from not only from EU but from all donors, from cooperation of donors. So more funds are needed, much more funds. And for now, we have secured only for the some essential needs.
Thank you, Svetlana.
Enlargement. About enlargement, yes, it's a very important also milestone for Ukraine for this year, because Ukraine will do anything to finish all the requirements by the European Commission to open these negotiations at the ministerial conference, and we were promised that this ministerial conference and negotiation framework will be ready till the beginning of the summer. No, now it's postponed because it's they need more time to for screening, and so Ukraine, for Ukraine, it's not only about enlargement per se, but also it's about consolidating society around one uniting purpose. And this, with Ukraine being at the war, it's very important to be consolidated and to be moving against this one idea of European integration. And I guess as for now, we can see that we have some problems with exports, but I will not because it will take time. But I only can say that I think that gradual integration into European single market, which is already possible under association agreement, can be all these steps, and there are a number of steps, and I think we will do something on this in our next papers. There are a number of steps that can be done to let you sectoral integration, gradual sector integration into EU single market, and maybe this will be like a good approach for Ukraine to get prepared, and for EU to get prepared for Ukraine, and like gradual accession. Thank you.
Gradual. Thank you, Svetlana, for the comprehensive overview, Amanda, Ricardo, and in the interest of time, I think we should move to the other parts of the world. So let's move to China, Indo-Pacific, and Latin America. And here, let me ask Ivano, how can the EU re-engage economically and politically countries in the Indo-Pacific?
I hope you can hear me. Okay, it's working. So I will be very brief. And first of all, thank you for coming. I got, regarding foresight and forecast, I got 1 hour ago a weather warning that the storm is coming. So actually, thank you for being here. If we are stuck here, I think it's going to be very interesting, the discussion.
I'll be from the store.
That's the thing. So when it comes to the Indo-Pacific, I mean, it's not a very easy question. The Indo-Pacific comprises around 40 countries. The EU itself, with its 27 member states, have different foreign policy priorities, different interests. What I think that is important for this year, in light of what is happening around the world, is that we really need to double down on our engagement in the Indo-Pacific. This can be through new partnerships, through sort of reinvigorated existing ones. The issue is that we lack, I think, when it comes to the Indo-Pacific, a strategic vision more than passion towards the region itself. We have a very good policy, the Indo-Pacific strategy, but For instance, in the Indo-Pacific strategy, we say that ASEAN is central, but ASEAN still needs to be central to our work on a daily basis. And if we want to diversify our economies, I think that Southeast Asia, but South Asia, for instance, India, they are going to be increasingly important. And we need to really think of a better way of engaging these countries. Also, from a narrative point of view, I think that some of these countries need to be engaged for their own merits, not because of, and here I can draw a parallel with Global Gateway, usually, and you can hear that from, especially from other countries in Africa. The Global Gateway should have been a policy adopted at least 10 years ago, and not for one of the main reasons was also actually to counter some investments from China to the BRI. So we need, and what they feel is that we are going to other regions around the world simply because we now are worried of the geopolitical competition. So these countries find themselves again into a sort of power struggle, and they don't want to be anymore. So I think also the narrative should change, but there are many other things to say, to add. But
and it's unfair to say, please be brief about China-EU relations. But what should we expect in 2024? Is it safe to say that the relationship is more or less stable or stabilized?
I think that we shouldn't expect dramatic changes this year. Now, there are many irritants between the EU and China. So anytime we might expect some geoeconomic tensions rising. But I think this year, what we are all watching, and maybe I shouldn't say this in the city, but we are not watching the elections in at the European Parliament, but we are rather watching the elections in November in the US to see how the EU-China relations can develop further. And I think the US, the EU, and China are trying momentarily to stabilize the relationship because there are too many other problems that we try. Now we need to have a sort of like engagement on some selected issues.
Thank you. Thank you. And let's move to Latin America before we move to the Q&A session. So Raul, maybe you can tell us about what should the EU expect in 2024 in Latin America. It's been quite dramatic last year.
Thank you, Anna. I will try to be brief, just like Ivana was. Latin America is coming out of an electoral cycle, very intensive one that started in 2021. And it's doing so with elections in Venezuela, Dominican Republic, Mexico, Uruguay, and Salvador, and Panama. I would anticipate political continuity in these elections, trends that have been in place in Latin America for the past 2-3 decades. I'm talking about democratic backsliding. I'm talking about growing inequality, also within the context of climate change. And since the war in Ukraine, in the context of growing inflation in the international financial system. But I think that there is something new. There is something unique that should concern the European Union from a strategic perspective. And it is a growing consensus, bipartisan, if you wish, among Latin American leaders, that Latin America has to behave and can behave as a non-aligned autonomous bloc. And this matters greatly to all of the other 3 powers that are trying to, and I quote El País here in an article from last year, to invite Latin America for a tango. These are, of course, China, the European Union as a bloc, and the US. Now, why this tango is interesting for the 3 suitors? Because Latin America has untapped markets, especially in those countries that are growing and have a growing middle class. Latin America has great capacity for agricultural exports, and this matters especially since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion in Ukraine and the disruption to the Black Sea grain trade. And it also has, and I think this is the crux of the deal, immense wealth in critical raw materials, lithium, copper, and so forth. This matters greatly in the digital and green transition. And the European Union is in all of these 3 fronts coming in late to the game. And here I will echo what Ivana was saying about Global Gateway. Global Gateway, as it was offered to LATAM, or rather Mercosur, in the last ELAC summit in the summer, is a good step, but it's not enough. The 49 billion, I think, was the commitment, is not nearly enough to rival what the Chinese can deploy through the Belt and Road Initiative. the question that I would pose for 2024, and it perhaps is too much of a dramatic question, but I think is a plausible one, is can China sign an FTA with Mercosur even before the European Union does it, or even in the complete absence of an FTA with the European Union? I think there is a wild card here, which is Javier Milei. He unexpectedly made openings towards the European Union in December for the FTA, but at the same time, he has been threatening to quit Mercosur altogether since he was running for his campaign. A Mercosur without Milei and with some of his members like Uruguay negotiating bilaterally with China for an FTA might be a Mercosur who is inclined to cut its losses, unify, and sign an FTA with China so that the bloc doesn't dissolve. So this is the great question, the great financial trade question, but affects all of our strategic areas that I think the European Union has ahead in Latin America in 2024. Thank you.
Thank you, Raul. And we also have what if sections in the Outlook paper to avoid if only. So this is one of the prompts. What if China reaches an FTA with Mercosur? So I invite you to delve deeper in if you're interested into this one. But let's take another round of the questions from the audience.
Thanks. I can start with this Indo-Pacific. You said that we have to double our activities there, but how do we get them interested on the other side? I mean, what is required for that? Many of these countries, they have so much more passion in growing their businesses than we have in Europe that actually they are not so very much interested in European businesses. So what can be done for that?
Thank you.
Thank you, Ivano, and for others for excellent presentation. And my question is to Ivano about EU-China relations. So you said that there are possibly some irritants for EU-China relations for the year of 2024. So could you name the top one or two or three at most of these irritants in the year of 2024 as far as the European strategic interest is concerned? So why will they become irritants for European Union vis-a-vis its relationship with China? Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? Yeah, if not, let's.
Okay, so I will start with the Indo-Pacific. And of course, what I have in mind is that the EU, when it comes to trade agreements, and we can see how also with other partners in Australia, for instance, we had some problems. And I think that first of all, negotiations, this is very much something important when it comes to FTAs, to have a more coherent approach within the EU. There are some member states' interests that are very difficult to try to balance out with other interests. And I think, for instance, the agriculture sector here in Europe. And then when it comes to some, and here I agree with you, there are some countries that do not want to necessarily engage in FTAs with you because they don't want to go through due diligence, through deforestation issues. But here there is a lot that you can do to help these countries to get deforestation or due diligence in place. In a way that, for instance, we have huge, when it comes to deforestation, for instance, the satellites power of the EU, it's important, for instance, to track and help companies on the ground in some countries in Southeast Asia, and here the case, to help them to identify where deforestation took place and is taking place. And this is what I see. It's important. Then, of course, the narratives. I think here it's something that we saw. It's extremely important, and we will see also, and we saw that also from Indonesia with the new elections and how things are changing. And when it comes to China, there are many irritants. I will perhaps say one political and one economic now. The political, it's the level of support that China will provide to Russia when it comes to its aggression vis-a-vis Ukraine. And this is something that I think the EU is trying to establish some red lines, and I think this is important. And the second, when it comes to the economy, it's China's overcapacity. so the trade imbalance. And we can delve into that. There are now irritants can come really from very minor issues, for instance, investigations on the EU liquid probe or EVs. They can take different forms, and of course, they can be then politicized in one way or another. So I think these are the main two irritants, but we can also go into others.
Thank you. This answers the questions. Or not?
EU Pacific and EU, like the Southeast and South Asia, they are, well, they won't stop trade with China because they are so dependent on that. But then we should be more attractive in Europe for those countries as well. Not just think that they are coming here if we ask them. That's not the way it goes.
Thank you, and I think we have time for one more question, if there are any, before we move to the next section in the Outlook paper, which is emerging challenges and securitization of everything. So thank you, Ivano, thank you, Raul, and these were the key regions and players. So on to the next one. And tell us how to say.
I don't know if I have the answer to that question. I don't know if there's even an answer to that question. But hi, everyone. I'm really happy to be here. And I just want to also thank Ricardo and his team for the opportunity. I think this is a really cool exercise to do yearly. And it gets me thinking about the future more than complaining about what's happening on the at the present time. So 2023 was the year of AI, even though on the European level, we've been talking about AI for a lot longer than just 1 year. We started talking about AI in Europe in 2018, but then with generative AI and general purpose AI and the boom of commercial AI, everyone started talking about that. But I just want to emphasize critical areas and yeah, just a few key points to keep in mind for 2024. So what is likely to happen is that the regulatory momentum that we saw was spurred with the massive digital files that were advanced by this commission and that kind of culminated with the AI Act will not be enough to save the Brussels effect from fizzling out. Actually, I think because of the concessions that were made, especially during the last trialogue negotiations, there's a lot of feeling on the state side that they have made a lot of concessions at the EU level, and I think it would likely hinder new files that still have to be discussed or still have to be advanced. And I think a telltale sign was the fact that the platform work directive, which also talks about algorithmic management and surveillance in the workplace, is now off the table because basically there's no agreement on the presumption of employment. So that's a telltale sign. Then we have to address the elephant in the room, which is the fact that Europe is nowhere near leading in the global AI race. And that is because of many decades and many years of deindustrialization policies. So we're going to have to address that, and we're going to have to double down on industrial policy. And then I also want to talk about questions of implementation and enforcement. As we all know, the AI Act has now not been passed, but they have agreed on the terms and the specifics. It's going to be posted on the Journal of the European Parliament, and then it will be entering into force in 2026. But there's so many questions surrounding the implementation and the enforcement of it. And what I see a lot is that everyone is focusing on the role of the AI board, the role of the AI office, but not many people are talking about standards. What the AI Act does is setting standards, harmonious standards, so that we have one coherent piece of legislation instead of 27 to regulate AI effectively and promote fair, trustworthy, and safe AI in the EU. But we still have to come up with the standards. There's going to be a massive debate on hammering out the details of those standards, and the European standardization office will have a major role in that. And yeah, that's going to be a main point for 2024. And then also I wanted to point out the fact that the EU is not only facing a fizzling out of the Brussels effect, but we're also losing diplomatic ground on the international level while we were negotiating the details of the AI Act internally. And I think we as the EU have more of an internal inward-looking eye at the current moment. There were a lot of more international efforts happening on the international stage. We had the US putting out in October the 2023 white paper on artificial intelligence, which tackled some of the issues that we wanted to talk about at the EU level, such as generative AI. But also we had the Bletchley Declaration on the UK side after the AI Safety Summit. And then we had renewed negotiations as part of the India and US Trade and Technology Council. And then now what we really have to focus on is be more present at the international level and on the international stages, especially if we want to focus on saving the Brussels effect. So what I'd like to see more of the EU is a bit of more present at the international level, especially through processes such as the G7 Hiroshima process on negotiations on AI. So yeah.
Thank you, Julia. And you also link in the paper industrial policy to AI. Maybe you could tell us more about how can the EU reinvigorate its stance on this link.
Yeah, of course. When it comes to AI, we'll think about something that's quite non-physical, something quite intangible, something like the cloud. But it has a very important physical dimension to it. And just to mention one thing is the importance of semiconductors in producing AI systems. And we know that we're not leading in the production or even, I think, according to recent studies, I think Europe has 10% capacity in the production of semiconductors globally. So I think we're going to have to address that. And that's only one point on industrial policy. But we have seen some efforts. We have had a CHIPS Act, and we have seen renewed efforts in securitizing the semiconductors value chain. But that's a massive effort. We're going to have to see a lot more on that side. But yeah, just want to mention that when we talk about AI, we talk about something that's ethereal, but also something that's quite tangent, as in physical. There's a quite physical dimension to it.
Thank you. Definitely an emerging challenge that is. So let's move to the enlargement policy, something that is re-emerging and is on everyone's lips in Brussels. So maybe we can start from the Western Balkans and then move to the Eastern trio.
Thank you, Jana. Yeah, I found it like not funny, but like curious that like enlargement is like put under emerging challenges, but like as you said, it has been something that after many years, like 2 decades of stagnation, the war in Ukraine, the Russian aggression to Ukraine, put enlargement back to the like high on the EU's agenda and put the focus back on the Western Balkans after so many years of like the Western Balkan 6 being kept in the waiting room. In the past 2 years since the full-scale invasion started, we saw like several breakthroughs, namely the finally opening accession negotiations with Albania and North Macedonia. When it comes to Western Balkans, then there was like all the Eastern trio side. But when it comes to Western Balkans, Bosnia was given candidate status also after 5 years. And finally, after also like many years of the Commission recommended it, the Council and the Parliament agreed on lifting visa requirements for Kosovo citizens. In this upcoming year, we will also see how this rhetoric about the renewed momentum for enlargement, the geopolitical imperative continues to be the mainstream, but to see this rhetoric translated into reality, like this will, like when it comes to the Western Balkans, this would mainly depend on 2 issues that are of course interlinked. And this is the capacity of the candidates to fulfill the still like pending reforms, namely related to rule of law, and then solve bilateral disputes. And then also like from the EU side, the capacity of the EU to start tackling and addressing the debate about how its future architecture will be in an enlarged EU, which we are not seeing it to the extent that we should be seeing it if the EU is being serious about enlargement. Addressing the issues like the debates on reform is not only necessary for the sake of being a functional EU, but also to send a message to the region, to the Western Balkans, that the EU is being serious about it. Because without the if the credibility of the membership promise doesn't become real again, I think it's going to be unlikely that we see like major reforms on the Balkans. I know that we have like really little time, so I just mentioned like few points that we will be like on the spot when it comes to the Western Balkans and its relations to the with the EU. And I mean, if I have time later, I can develop them. Otherwise, I will just leave them there. First, it's going to be the elections in North Macedonia that are taking place in April. North Macedonia needs to amend its constitution in line with the requirements by Bulgaria in order to be able to advance in the EU path. Right now, they don't have the majority, the required majority in the parliament to do such amendments, and we will see what happens now in April. Then Montenegro, after like 2-3 years of like the political crisis, there was a new government formed in October 2023, and the new government committed to fulfill the interim rule of law benchmarks of chapter 23 and 24 by summer, which is the main requirement for Montenegro to continue advancing. Then the big issue or the big challenge still both for the security of the region and for the EU and for the region's EU membership prospects is the dialogue / conflict, call it however you want to call it, between Kosovo and Serbia. And for different reasons, I don't think that this year we will see like major breakthroughs. There are elections in Kosovo in 2025, which means that it's going to be really, I don't think that the government or in Pristina is gonna, like give concessions or like reduce or its narrative or its push. So I think it's gonna be difficult to get to points of agreement. Then because of the situation, the post-election situation in Serbia, with the serious allegations of fraud, that we will see what happens with that and what's the response by the EU on that. Then also, of course, the elections at the European Parliament and the fact that the mandate of Lajčák, the negotiator, is expiring in August. So I think it's going to be a bit of a year of stalemate. Then another of like the big issues or like the spots is the Republika Srpska. Like we saw yesterday, how Dodik, president of Republika Srpska, was meeting with Putin. So things don't look promising on that front either. And then finally, the situation in Serbia, the elections in December, there were like serious allegations of fraud. The OSCE concluded that there were like, several vote buying like fraud allegations. The European Parliament requested an investigation, but the Commission hasn't really followed up on that. So we will see what's the response by the EU on that, and I will leave it here.
Thank you, Berta. And there was already a question about enlargement, which was prompted by Russia's unprovoked aggression towards Ukraine. So, Amanda, maybe you can tell us about the Eastern Trio, Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova. Thank you, Amanda. It seems like enlargement is definitely the call for of history. Thank you, Berta. And let's move to the security and defense, short-term needs versus long-term considerations. Mihai, what will be the security and defense priorities post-elections in US and the EU? Thanks.
Thank you, Anna. Well, it's good that we left security and defense at last, because I don't even know where to start. There are so many issues. Maybe just I'll try to outline a couple of more general things and a couple of more specific points. First one is that security and defense definitely will top the campaign for the European elections. And then security and defense will also have a very high place on the strategic agenda of the European Council for 2024-2029. And then, of course, it will be on top of the agenda of the next Commission. Now, 2024 will also be a year of continuing implementation of different initiatives. By initiatives, I would start, of course, with the strategic compass and everything related to it. I would include here the rapid deployment capacity, the European Peace Facility, but also different strategies that the EU has launched since February 2022, strategies for space, for maritime security, an action plan for military mobility, for instance, and others. And now going to more specific aspects, I would stop on three things. First one is the short, long-term debate. Second one are threats in the maritime domain. And third one is military mobility, I'm sorry. First one is the short, long-term debate. At this point at European level, there is a dilemma and a debate about where to focus more on the short-term needs, which are replenishing ammunition, buying military equipment, for instance, versus the long-term considerations, which are building a European defense industrial base on the long term. So we still aren't at the point where we have decided where we should focus more. And this is also at the EU level, but also at different member states level. Now, secondly, the threats in the maritime domain. We've seen last year a surge in threats at sea. And here, of course, if you remember the Baltic connector incident that basically cut some energy pipeline and also some communication cables. So protection of critical infrastructure will be definitely on top of the agenda. Protection of sea critical infrastructure, it's already a big priority at NATO level, but it will be also at the EU level. Now, third point, actually, no, on the maritime domain, of course, what I forgot to mention is the crisis in the Red Sea, which, of course, will test the EU even further. We have a mission agreed, ASPIDES, which was agreed a few days ago. It will be important to see how this mission will be implemented, because the situation is getting worse. There are more attacks on commercial shippings, and most likely we'll see also further attacks on military ships in the Red Sea. Now, third point is military mobility, which will become more central in debates. What I mean by military mobility is moving military assets from point A to point B in Europe. There are many challenges in doing this. One of them is the transport infrastructure, for instance, which in many cases is not suited to holding this military equipment. Here, there is, of course, a big EU role and also an important NATO role at the same time. While, of course, moving this equipment will fall into the NATO area, the EU has an important role in updating this infrastructure, in channeling funds for it. And of course, we'll see more discussions about this, because military mobility is also an important deterrent if you think long term. If you are able to move quickly the military assets, then of course you'll deter any adversary from a potential attack. Now, last point, and then I'll finish, is more of a reflection of a couple of aspects that my colleagues have mentioned. One of them, and I think Ricardo touched upon this, is mentality. Mentality at EU, mentality of EU member states. I think we're still not there in many member states, that the mentality is not in line with the security situation in Europe at this point. So in some cases, some member states still don't fully realize the new security environment that we see in Europe. Then second point, I recall it's something that you, Amanda, mentioned, the self-congratulatory stances that we take. I mean, there have been many instruments at EU level in security and defense that have worked in practice, but we shouldn't fall into this trap and self of congratulate ourselves. There's still a long way to go before we can talk about the EU as a security and defense actor in a full sense. And last point doesn't have to do so much with security and defense, but more in a broader sense, and it is engagement of other countries. I think we are at the point where we cannot afford to engage only with countries that see the international system the same as us. We also have to engage with countries that don't see it and try to see common ground. And I'll stop here.
Thank you, Mihai. And with this, we're going to move to the Q&A session for the emerging policies and challenges.
Thank you very much. I was a little bit wondering, if you all see the separate chapters of your thoughts, of course, it has itself standing. But from an EU perspective, we all know these problems and we know all the situations in the world, but we all also know about our internal problems, which is very much linked to this external dimension. If you want to think about the multi-financial framework, what we now in the midterm review, with 1% of GDP, it's difficult to finance all this Christmas list. It's also difficult, and it's also related to our governance model at the end. If it's this governance model, what the EU has, it's also limited, not only to finances, but also in regard how we deal with activities outside the EU. I fully agree. It's necessary to have a stronger voice, to have a voice of power, as you have marketing it. But we also need a voice of finance. Yeah, and this meets to discuss what is a European public good. Could be defense a European public good. How much this European public good has to be. Can this be done in the remedy of the current EU treaty? Because currently we are more a club than a state. Yeah, we are a federation. We have no possibilities to have EU taxes to finance these public goods. Yeah, at some extent, we are depending totally on the member states. We call it own resources to finance this, but at the end, it's not like a finance tool what you would really need to finance big initiatives. Yeah, and it's not only linked to defense; it's also linked, as I said, to governance model. I would also wonder if we should also think beyond the EU. Is there a new governance model needed globally to embed the EU as an actor? We are the only regional structure which works at the end globally. We have something to show to the world, how we organize us at the regional level. And I think this could be also a kind of export product to other regions to show regional structures help to tackle problems and also to solve maybe global problems at the end. This I wanted to say. Thank you.
I think that would require another panel discussion, but let's take one more question or two more questions.
Thank you. Maybe it's a little bit in the same context as the last comment. It's about the European Parliament elections. So, of course, the link between the foreign policy and European Parliament is not entirely direct, but I wanted to know your views on what kind of changes we might see in the EU's foreign policy reaction to some of these crises that we are seeing. Thank you.
Sure.
It's Ayşe Yürekli. I want to make a comment with one head of mine and a question with the other one. The first one, I'm missing here the wonderful Shada Islam because she has done this wonderful special contribution on Afghanistan and women's rights. And I appreciate that very much as being now the EU representative for women entrepreneurs of Turkey. I'm very happy to see this special section in the Outlook paper. And the question is to Svetlana, actually. And this with my hat as an independent analyst and commentator and researcher in the Brussels bubble about Turkey, because I'm originally from Istanbul, Turkey as well. And when it comes to Ukraine, from your point of view, Turkey has been playing an ambiguous and unique role and sometimes contradictory. How do you view personally and professionally the situation of Turkey or the role it has been playing in the last 2 years since the full-scale Russian invasion in Ukraine? Thank you.
Thank you, Lars. Lars Holgard, formerly with the Commission, now with Trade Up. In continuation of the comment, are we heading towards a UES, United States of Europe? Really the question now.
Thank you. I think we have a lot of questions, maybe not enough time today. Ricardo, let's start with you.
I mean, just very briefly on some of the comments, because those were some of the parts that I covered. On financing, I think you put the hand on the sweet spot, which is really a lot of these things need a lot of money to be done. And I think, but that's for me, it also is a result of the inability that I think most of us spoke of the EU to be able to set strategic goals. What are we trying to achieve? And I think the moment that you actually know what you want to do, or that you are able to reach, some form of consensus, and as you said, it's very difficult to do at the EU level, at the EU 27. But I think the fact that we are not able to allocate resources to something that we find important is because we are unable to decide what we think that is important for us. So I think that's element that is there, that is relevant, because, we can give the example. It seems that a virus is more threatening than Mr. Putin. Because for a virus, the EU was able to get together and create this next generation EU, which potentially can mobilize 800 billion euros. Okay, it's a one-off. It's supposed to be temporary, but we know how things that are normally temporary in Europe become permanent. And so I think, is this a way for us to move forward? And this probably would touch upon some of the questions that were laid before. Because the other side of the coin is the following: on the pandemic. Sure, you know the numbers, but the world economy with the pandemic lost $14 trillion. That was the cost of the pandemic, not to speak of the 6.5 million of people that died. So the question is, isn't it not worth it to spend a little bit more than the 1% that you mentioned? And, member states are at the moment debating, having a fight, especially France and Germany, about 5 billion euros for their European peace facility. This doesn't make any sense, given the challenges that we have in front of us. So I think your point is very important, because, of course, money doesn't grow in trees. So we need to see also where the money is going to come from. And that then touches upon so many of the other policies that, the economy, if the European economy was stronger, if it was more productive, if it was more competitive, all of these things could potentially be solved. But I agree with you. I think we need to think very hard how we're going to finance this, because there needs to be trade-offs. We won't be able to probably to do everything. And every time you speak with someone that is following a particular policy area, it seems that policy area is really the most crucial thing that the EU needs to do. So I think we also need to wrap our minds around sort of some of these trade-offs that inevitably, I think we're gonna have to do. And my hope would be that we would do this by design and not by accident, or by being forced to make decisions because of external factors. So I totally agree with you that the money issue is fundamental in this. On the elections and foreign policy, I think, and some of us touch upon this in some of the entries, which is also what will be the makeup of the parliament, and how some of the parties, what are their positioning, for example, vis-a-vis China, vis-a-vis Russia, and so on and so forth. But I think in terms of, I would, my take was that, let's say, the general consensus of the four parties that potentially will still be dominant in the European Parliament, so the EPP, the SD, the Renew Europe, and the Greens. There is sort of you can say that on China, for example, or on the US or Russia, there's different approach, but it's very, there is an ability to think along the same lines. It's true. There's also here an element of knowledge, how much people, the new people that will come into the parliament actually know about the issues and understand the problems, because this is also very complex. So I think, I mean, the results then, of course, as you say, I mean, they will have also an implication to who's going to be in charge of the institutions, and those that are able actually to prepare with more time, and those that are less able to prepare with more time. So I think that's something that we'll see. And I mean, in that case, I think the president of the commission and the high representative, because you will know who they are, you know, relatively early, let's say, in the process. Less so for the commissioners. They have more time to prepare their sort of their let's say their mandates, their sort of what they are really keen to let's say to focus their priorities, which allows them a preparation time before they take office. And I think that was only for me, right? Yeah.
Thank you, Ricardo. And maybe you can comment on the United States of Europe.
I mean, it could. I mean, you know, to tell you the truth, I think that's like a quantum leap. I think, I mean, as a vision, I think we can have that vision, because it's to a certain extent, and this relates a little bit to some of the questions, and maybe even to what you were saying, is, and this is something on the language of power that we've been discussing here, is also the executive capacity of the institutions. But what we have seen also, the ability of let's say of the Commission to be more be bolder and be more decisive over the past mandate, has rubbed wrongly in many member states. The fact that Mrs. von der Leyen has been so sort of out there. I mean, look at just we just mentioned the sanctions packages. Many of the sanctions packages were announced even before they had actually been, and some of them discussed with member states. So I think the ability to actually to make decisions, to move decisions ahead, might also mean that you know, there needs to be more centralization, more ability to actually to put these things together. Now, I think, I mean, for the time being, and maybe I'm just being, you know, unable to see beyond, and I fail in imagination as well. I think the nation state, the nations are still quite important at the European level, whatever we say. I think we might want to see is a little bit I mean, what you mentioned, sort of, what are the public goods that we ought and that we are able to do better together? And I think that's a conversation that we have not had for I think for a long time. Everything is important, so to say.
Thank you. Thank you, Ricardo. We're a little bit over time, so I will probably steal a couple of more minutes from you. Svetlana, maybe you can address.
Thank you for your question. I will be very short. Yes, you're right that the Turkey position was rather controversial. On the one hand, Ukraine is very grateful for weapon supplies that were provided by Turkey, and especially during the first months of the war, they were very helpful for Ukraine. On the other hand, Turkey didn't join the EU sanctions policy, and again, it's by buying or by buying cheap oil from Russia, they are actually helping to sponsor this war, to fund this war. But it's not only we can blame Turkey about this, we can also blame EU countries as well. I'm sorry to say this, but this is a reality. But again, of course, Turkey is much more in cooperative with Russia than EU countries. On the other hand, Turkey government says that yes, they do not join sanctions policy, but they do not violate EU sanctions policy. So this is a very important point that Ukraine at least want from Turkey, that they do not violate. So they do not provide military components, military some parts to Russia to produce weapons against Ukraine and to be used against Ukraine. This is very important. So at least do not violate. But of course, I think with more cooperation, with better, improved cooperation between Turkey, EU, and Ukraine, Turkey maybe reconsider the approach to Russia and to Russian oil. Thank you.
Thank you, Svetlana, and thank you to all the panelists for your insightful contributions and enlightening us on these policy areas. And thank you to the audience. It was rightly mentioned that there are more contributions in the Outlook paper than the ones that we discussed. We also have Turkey more extensively in the paper, as well as MENA region, women's rights, as it was mentioned by EPC Senior Advisor Shada Islam, as well as more flashpoints, key issues to follow, cracks in the EU social contract, EU migration and asylum policy, as well as a decisive year for NATO, special contribution by Jamie Shia, who is also EPC Senior Advisor. These are also to be found in the Outlook paper, as well as the recommendations that we provide for all the policy areas that we have discussed today. Just to briefly have some key takeaway messages, in 2024, the EU is likely to continue its learning journey on power while trying to avoid losing influence. And the outcome of US presidential election could be a geopolitical watershed moment for transatlantic relations. Russia is likely to continue being Europe's most important security threat, as we have extensively discussed, especially in the context where Western support for Ukraine could dwindle further. Sanctions circumvention remains unaddressed, and the MENA Middle East conflict is likely to feature high at the top of the diplomatic agenda in search of peace and process that can sustain it in the long term. And economic security is likely to continue shaping the EU's policy agenda as Europeans go to the polls to elect the new European Parliament in June 2024. So this is what the Outlook paper is kind of alluding to for the rest of the year. And we hope that you will find the paper as a useful navigation guide throughout 2024. So I invite you to scan the QR code that is spread around the room and download our paper and delve deeper into it. It will take more than 1 hour probably, but it remains for me to just thank you for being here and listening to the discussion and also participating. And I leave the last word to Ricardo.
Thank you for the great job. And you did, as always, you're the moderator of the Outlook paper launch, and you always do a great job. And it's, anyway, I think you can only do a paper with a team like this. So a round of applause for them. Yeah. That's it. Enjoy the paper. I would invite you to read it and to enjoy it, and to push back as well on some of the ideas that maybe we have there, because it's only through that exchange that we're actually able to learn and to understand the future a little bit better. And again, thank you to all that were here and those that were not participating today. And thank you all for coming. Thank you very much.
Thank you.